What's up guys, DZeef here, and today we have our first look at some cards from the History Archive collection, which will release in February of 2022 for the OCG. Now, will we get this set in the TCG? I'm not really sure about that, but I'm sure we'll see these cards at some point. What makes this set so cool is that it's supposed to have 24 cards that are based on anime moments throughout the different Yu-Gi-Oh series, and I think that is really exciting, and we can already see that in the first 6 cards that have been revealed. Now, as a lot of you know, I am not super knowledgeable about the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, especially when it comes to the newer franchises, but I'm sure people in the comment section below can help explain the context of some of these cards. The first card we're going to talk about is Evolution Result Burst, a brand new normal spell card. This one says you can only activate one spell card with this card's name per turn. You cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, except with spell effects. Also, add one Overload Fusion from your deck to your hand. Also, the maximum number of attacks per battle phase this turn of any monster you fusion summon using 6 or more materials with Overload Fusion this turn is equal to the number of materials used for its summon. I'll say this about Evolution Result Burst, I don't think this card is very competitive. However, if you manage to somehow resolve this card's effect and the Overload Fusion effect, and your opponent doesn't have a way to deal with the fusion summon monster, you will probably be able to get a pretty easy OTK on the opponent. I think what you have to compare this card to is the recently released Power Bond support like Cyberdark Chimera, and when you compare this card to that one, I think this one looks a lot worse. It's not that Power Bond is necessarily better than Overload Fusion. I think they're both pretty good at OTKing the opponent. However, Cyberdark Chimera is a lot easier to use in situations where you might not be able to resolve the Power Bond, where this card is pretty bad if you can't get a 6 material fusion summon off using Overload Fusion. Next up, we have the Great Soul, a normal trap card that says you can only use the 1 and 2 effect of this card's name each once per turn. If a Dragon Synchro monster is on the field, special summon up to 2 Resonator monsters and or level 1 Dragon monsters from your deck. When a monster effect is activated, if you control a level 10 or higher Dark Dragon Synchro monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard, negate that effect, and if you do, one Synchro monster you control gains 2000 attack until the end of the next turn. So the Great Soul is actually not that bad of a support card for Resonator type decks. Basically, this card is saved by the fact that you are allowed to use both effects in the same turn. That means you can set up your board with a level 10 or higher Dark Dragon Synchro monster, and then you can use the Great Soul on your opponent's draw phase to special summon 2 monsters, which then puts this card in your graveyard so that if your opponent uses a monster effect, you suddenly have an extra negation, which is pretty nice. Will the Great Soul make Resonators good after the deck has never been competitively viable up until this point? Probably not, but I think it is a step in the right direction. Next up, we have Soul Energy Max. This one is a new Obelisk trap card. It's really cool. It says you can only use the 1 and 2 effect of this card's name each once per turn, so you are allowed to use both of them in the same turn, but they are hard once per turns. If you control an Obelisk the Tormentor, whose original attribute is Divine, you contribute 2 face-up monsters except that Obelisk the Tormentor, destroy as many monsters your opponent currently controls as possible, and if you do, inflict 4,000 damage to them. The second effect says during the main or battle phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add one Obelisk the Tormentor from your deck or graveyard to your hand, then immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one Obelisk the Tormentor face up. One thing I want to make very clear at the beginning here before talking about how good or bad this card is that you can't tribute opponent's monsters with this card's effect unless you have another card on the board that allows you to do so. I know it says tribute 2 face-up monsters, not 2 face-up monsters you control, but if you look in the Yu-Gi-Oh rulebook, tributing only means your cards unless otherwise specified. So no, you can't use Soul Energy Max if you have Obelisk to tribute 2 of your opponent's monsters and then also Regeki them after that. That's not how it works. Regardless, I think one of the problems that I've found when I've played Egyptian God card decks is that sometimes you have too many of the tribute fodder cards when you already have your big Egyptian God on the board. So I don't think it's necessarily bad to have a card that can use the extra tribute monsters that you might have on the board after already summoning that Obelisk the Tormentor. Where I think this card has problems though is that clearly it is harder to use than Soul Crossing or Fist of Fate, 2 recently released Obelisk support cards that I think are are a lot better than this one. This card isn't terrible necessarily, but compared to those two spells, it doesn't look that great. Fist of Fate is a much better card when you already have Obelisk on the board because it doesn't require you to have extra monsters to tribute, and Soul Crossing is better if you don't have Obelisk on the board because it helps you get it on the field. This card is somewhere in between. It's only good if you have Obelisk on the field with extra cards to tribute, but if you don't have Obelisk on the field, the Graveyard Effect, while it can help you add the Obelisk back to your hand to normal summon it, it doesn't actually help you get the tributes on the board. So I think this card is kind of in a weird spot. Maybe people will play it in their Obelisk decks. I'm sure people will try it out at least, but I don't think even on a casual level that this card will make a huge difference for Egyptian God players. Next up, we have Dragon King's Legend, a new quick play spell card, and this time, unlike a couple of the other cards in today's video, this one does have two effects, but you are only allowed to use one of them in the same turn, and it will be a hard once per turn. Target one dragon monster you control, double its current attack until the end of this turn. Then, if your opponent controls a dragon monster, the targeted monster's effect activations cannot be negated this turn. The second effect, which once again here you are not allowed to use in the same turn that you used the first effect, says during your main phase you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon in defense position one of your Dragon Xyz monsters that is banished or in the graveyard. I don't really think this card is very good. I think the on-field boost is okay, but not that impressive, and the graveyard effect is alright in a Galaxy Photon deck because you do have a number of Xyz monsters that can be summoned on other Xyz monsters, but I don't think it's relevant enough because to get that effect you would have to use the on-field effect of this card first, and then wait a turn and then use that graveyard ability. I think at that point you might as well just play Monster Reborn. Next up, we have Prisoners of Destiny, a new continuous trap card that would have been very interesting if it was a continuous spell. Here's what it does. It says you can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. Once per chain, if a Link 4 monster is Link summoned, you can place one counter on this card, maximum 3, then you can apply one of these effects depending on the number of those counters on this card. If you have one counter on this card, you can declare one card name, and for the rest of the turn, negate the activated effects and effects on the field of cards with that original name. If you have two counters, you can special summon one level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard, and if you have three counters, you can send this card to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon one Link 4 monster from your extra deck. So like I said, I think this card would have been pretty interesting if it was a continuous spell card instead of a continuous trap card, but at the moment I don't see this card being very viable. It is pretty cool though. I think all three of those effects are good effects, and I don't think it's that hard to put counters on this card, especially during certain formats. Remember, it triggers off of your opponent's Link 4s as well, so in the best case scenario, you use this card on your opponent's turn to get a counter on it when your opponent Link summons a Link 4 monster, which would then allow you to negate a card's effects. That's not that bad. And then on your turn, you summon another Link 4 monster, which puts another counter on this card, which allows you to have a small type of Monster Reborn effect if you want it. I don't think this card is good enough to see competitive play, which at this point, yeah, I'm kind of sounding like a broken record. I don't think this pack is supposed to be very competitive, and in terms of casual play, this is one of the better cards that has been revealed so far. Finally, we have Graceful Song under the Frosty Moon, a new equip spell that says you can only use the 1 and 2 effect of this card's name each once per turn. Special summon one level 4 or lower fairy, spellcaster, winged beast, or beast warrior monster from your hand, and if you do equip it with this card, then you can return all dragon monsters on the field to the hand. During the end phase, if this card is in your graveyard because it was sent there while it was face up in the spell and trap zone this turn, you can add one Polymerization spell, one fusion spell, or one fusion parasite from your deck to your hand. This card is by far the worst of all of the reveals. I'm not even going to try and pretend I could find a way to use this. This really is quite bad. Maybe if it could summon a warrior monster, then you could argue that it could be an okay equip spell to play in decks that play Isolde, but because it doesn't work with warrior monsters and because those types don't really care about playing equip spells that much, I don't think you would ever play this card in a competitive deck, and honestly I think you'd have a hard time playing it in a casual deck as well. Like all the other cards in today's video, this one is an anime reference, and I have read up on the context of this card a little bit, but while the context is cool, it doesn't make the card any better in terms of actually wanting to put it in your deck. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope the other History Archive Collection cards are a bit more competitive than these cards. I think Konami is capable of making anime throwback cards that are competitive, but these cards are not really impressing me that much at this point. I'll see you guys later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.